It's rough when you lose the Super Bowl because ultimately you're just one of 31 teams that didn't accomplish the number one goal at the end of the season, which is hoisting the Lombardi trophy. And in a lot of ways, you feel like you got so close, yet you're so far away that you may indeed be the biggest losers of all out of anybody of the entire season. It's unfortunate, but it's an understandable feeling. I mean, the amount of disappointment you feel for not making the playoffs cannot anywhere near match the disappointment of getting to the biggest game and falling short. This is something the Denver Broncos organization and their fans have been used to over the years. Yeah, they've got two Super Bowl victories, but they now have five Super Bowl losses. So out of seven appearances, two championships. Unfortunately, like I said, for the Broncos organization and their fans, they're kind of used to this type of thing. So they're used to the disappointment a little bit. But I don't want to sit there and belittle or demean the great season that the Denver Broncos had this past year in 2013. I mean, they went 13-3. They won the AFC West by 2 games over the Kansas City Chiefs. They ended up playing relatively well in both the divisional round and the AFC Championship round and became AFC champions, only to sit there ultimately and go to the Super Bowl and get boat raced in every aspect of the game by the Seattle Seahawks in what could be arguably, in my opinion, the greatest all-around team performance in a Super Bowl in NFL history. They lost to them 43-8. So much possibility, so many things that went well for the Broncos just to get to the championship game and basically get embarrassed. And I mean, there's no other way to look at it. And a lot of people will sit there in the offseason and in the preseason, heading into the 2014 NFL season, will sit there and try and tell you that the Denver Broncos are Super Bowl contenders and, they might win Super Bowl 49. And some of the factors that play into that are you look at the Peyton Manning media bias. You could see it heading into the Super Bowl. The Seahawks clearly had the better 53-man roster, and to me, several matchups favored the Seattle Seahawks. Most importantly, their front four pass rushing unit against the Denver Broncos offensive line. And that was the signature key difference. It wasn't the only one, but it was the key signature difference. But so much of the media going into that game would even acknowledge that the Seahawks had a better overall team. They had the more traditional championship formula of defense and running the football. But the Broncos had Peyton Manning, so we have to pick Peyton Manning. Now, along with that Peyton Manning media bias of teams always sitting there and picking his teams to go to the Super Bowl, let's face it, Peyton Manning is one of the all-time great quarterbacks in NFL history, arguably the greatest statistical regular season quarterback in NFL history. Playoffs, different matter. Even the idiots some of them at Pro Football Focus that don't understand, Peyton doesn't play as well nearly in the playoffs as he does in the regular season. The proof is in the pudding, jackasses. But when you have Peyton Manning, you do at least afford yourself a chance to win, especially when you look at how well he played in 2013, which, yes, was a step up from what he played at that level in 2012. I mean, but even if he has a little bit of a drop off in 2014, assuming that his physical in March checks out okay and he comes back to play again in 2014, Peyton Manning's still going to be Peyton Manning. He's still going to be a Hall of Fame quarterback, and he's going to put up some monster numbers and help the Broncos score a lot of points and win a lot of regular season football games. It helps when you have offensive weapons like Demaryius Thomas and Wes Welker and Julius Thomas. Um, this is a team, and this is something that's very, symbolic of Peyton Manning teams traditionally, is they do have a lot of weapons around him. I don't necessarily begrudge him for that, but it doesn't hurt. Not only do you have Peyton Manning, but you have explosive players like Thomas and Demaryius Thomas, Julius Thomas being the other Thomas. You have Wes Welker, a great player out of the slot. And you look at the Broncos too, not only offensively but defensively, they had some key players out this year that look to be returning healthy in 2014. You lose two all-pro players in Ryan Clady and Von Miller. I mean, those are arguably two of the three best players on the entire Denver Broncos roster that missed a good portion of the season. Clady most of the season, and Von Miller because of the suspension and then tearing the ACL. He missed a good portion of the season as well. You've got other guys that look like they could be coming back from injuries like Raheem Moore and Derek Wolfe and Chris Harris and so on. So there are a lot of guys that the Broncos looked at as key contributors that ultimately missed portions of the season. Even Chris Harris, you could sit there and say, well, he played in the playoffs, but yeah, by the time they got to the Super Bowl, you could clearly see where they missed him. So they're going to get all of these guys back, you would assume, healthy and ready to go for 2014. It also helps them that the AFC really lacks elite teams. The New England Patriots are getting old, and they only get to a certain point, and that's all they're going to do. And I don't see things really changing for 2014. That next level of teams, the teams like the Cincinnati's and the Indianapolises and the Kansas Cities and the Baltimores and the Miamis and the San Diegos, could one of those teams potentially step up and become an elite team in the AFC? They could. But at this point in time, until you see how the offseason plays out, you really can't sit there and say for sure that any of them are going to take that next step and become a legit threat to the Denver Broncos. So the media and a lot of sports fans are going to sit there and just jump all over the Denver Broncos and just try and tell you flat out that this team, no doubt about it, it's going right back to Super Bowl 49. Uh-uh. I'm here to tell you today why they won't get there, and I damn guarantee it. Now, first and foremost, Peyton Manning. That's one reason. And it's several different factors. Number one, it's his salary cap figure. For a team in the NFL to tie up a lot of money into one player, in the case of a Peyton Manning, you're talking about close to 15% of your total salary cap space. Yeah, you could sit there and argue that he's worth it, and definitely, sure, he is worth it, but it can restrict you and what you do in terms of re-signing players or going out and getting players in free agency when you have so much of your cap space tied into one player. That cap space that is set aside and necessitated based off of the skill level and the name of somebody like a Peyton Manning. You're also looking at a player that I know it sounds stupid to say, with his great 2013 season, I think you're going to slowly see him start to decline. You could see already, I feel like in 2013, especially in the Super Bowl, you saw his diminishing arm strength. And, you look at his injury history, it's one shot to the neck away from potentially being done. And you look at the history of Peyton Manning teams, for all the great teams he played on over the years and all the playoff teams he had in Indianapolis and all the teams, that he's had throughout his career that have been championship contenders. He's been in the league 16 seasons. He's made it to 3 Super Bowls. 3 of them. It's not a lot. That's not none, obviously, but he doesn't have a track record going to like 5 or 6 of them, something like a Tom Brady who's been to 5 of them. The bottom line is, as history would indicate, it is incredibly tough to get there. It's a testament to Peyton Manning in some respects that he's even been able to make it to 3 Super Bowls. But the history is not kind to him in terms of being able to do that, not to mention the fact that I wonder how much this will potentially deflate him. The fact that he, along with the rest of his team, flat out choked and was overwhelmed, got intimidated, scared because they were overprepared, they overanalyzed, and they had an example of paralysis by analysis. They got smacked in the mouth. Seattle was too quick, too fast, too strong, and Denver didn't know what the hell they were doing. Flat out. They got taken out of their game early, and Peyton Manning was a part of that, accepted people. So he's one reason. The next reason, you look at this team and you see, once some other things get set aside, the Denver Broncos may have somewhere between 20 to 25 million in total cap space available. And they have some big-time free agents that they're going to have to worry about. Noshawn Moreno is a free agent. Eric Decker is a free agent. Dominique Rodgers-Cromartie is a free agent. Sean Phillips is a free agent. Other guys, second-tier players like Wesley Woodyard and Zane Beadles. These are guys here that with all that cap space that you have left, you're probably not going to be able to re-sign all of them. You're going to have to prioritize who you want to keep and who you're going to have to try and live without. You might probably say that Noshawn Moreno is going to be a goner. That's why they drafted Monte Ball in the second round, and that's fine. But Monte Ball didn't exactly do anything in his rookie season to indicate that he could put up the same level of performance that Noshawn Moreno did in 2013 in the contract year. Eric Decker is probably going to command $8 or $9 million a year on the open market, getting number 1 wide receiver money. If you're the Denver Broncos, do you really want to pay an Eric Decker number 1 receiver money? Dominique Rodgers-Cromartie might be the biggest priority. But again, he had 1 or 2 down seasons, played really well in a contract year. Some people question his desire to play and want to do well on a consistent basis. Do you really want to tie up a lot of money into him? Sean Phillips is 33. He had a resurgent year in 2013, but can you really get lucky twice with him as he goes into age 34 season in 2014? Not only that, not only do they have some free agents to worry about, they've also got some contracts coming down the works that might further hinder their ability to re-sign some of those guys. Guys like Demaryius Thomas and Julius Thomas and Von Miller and Terrence Knighton all have contracts that expire after the end of the 2014 season, you would have to think a major priority for this Broncos organization heading into 2014 would be to get Demaryius Thomas a new contract, perhaps even Julius Thomas a new contract. Get it done now. They might at some point in time decide that before the end of the season they want to lock up Von Miller long term. Same thing with Terrence Knighton. You're going to need cap space to do that. And if they re-sign all of their free agents, I find it very hard to believe that you're going to have enough cap space freed up to be able to lock up all these guys that you need to lock up. I mean, in my opinion, I'd rather lock up a Julius Thomas and a Demaryius Thomas over an Eric Decker and a No Sean Moreno. There's going to be tough choices to make. That's the world we live in today's parity-driven free agency world of the NFL. And then we also look at NFL history. There have been 48 Super Bowls. Only 4 teams have ever made it back to the Super Bowl the year after losing a Super Bowl. Only 4. This is documented fact. The 72 Dolphins, the 74 Vikings, the 87 Broncos, and then you had one team did it 3 years in a row, the 91, 92, and 93 Buffalo Bills. Total of 6 times it's happened in 48 Super Bowls by 4 different teams. The numbers aren't good. The point I'm getting at is history indicates that it's incredibly tough to do. And you look at the last team to do it, the Buffalo Bills. Sure, they made it to 4 straight Super Bowls in the 90s, lost them all. But that was over 20 years ago. And that was before the salary cap and free agency really changed the landscape of the NFL. There's a reason no team has done it since. A lot of people assumed, and understandably so, that the San Francisco 49ers were going to get back to the Super Bowl this year. And they got really close. But that just shows you, for a team that had a really deep and talented 53-man roster, all around, perhaps the second best roster in the National Football League compared to the Seattle Seahawks, some might even argue the best, they couldn't even get back to the Super Bowl. You look at all these other teams over the years that lost a Super Bowl, didn't get back the next year. Both times the New England Patriots lost a Super Bowl under Belichick, and they didn't get back the next year. So history to me indicates that somehow, some way, something's going to go awry, something's going to go amiss, and as a result, the Broncos are going to be left out in the cold. That's not to suggest that I don't think they'll still win the division in 2014. I think they will. They may win a playoff game, but to me, I'd guarantee it at this point that they're going no farther than the AFC Championship game, if they even make it that far. There's that Super Bowl letdown, and there's something to that, and it's incredibly difficult to play at that same level the next season, and history clearly is on my side and bears that out. And there's also no guarantee that these injured players like the Ryan Clady's and the Von Millers of the world and the Raheem Morrises and the Chris Harrises and the Derek Wolves come back to play at the same level that they did before. There's no guarantee of that. Especially guys like Harris and Von Miller coming off of torn ACLs. Again, there is no guarantee. It might take them a season to get back into form. They might come back into form right away. But, when you're banking on injured players to come back, these guys come back healthy, and then maybe some other guys go down. Maybe you lose a Demaryius Thomas or a Julius Thomas to a knee injury. It seemed like even with some of the injuries that the Broncos had, they did have a lot of things go right with them. And they still seem to be able to stem the tide. They only really lost to me 2 really key critical players during the season. 2 of their 3 best, yes, perhaps. But, a lot of their other key components were able to stay healthy throughout the season. And then you look at this team, they're going to be drafting 31st in the first round. They have all 7, picks, 1 in each round. But they don't have an abundance of picks. They don't have a bunch of high picks. With all the team needs that they have, they need help in their secondary, both at corner and safety. Champ Bailey's got a huge cap figure in 2014. You may release him, and you probably should release him. You may or may not bring back the ERC. Your safeties like Nacho and Adams and Raheem Moore are definitely nothing special. You need help everywhere on that secondary. You could use help at middle linebacker. You could maybe even use help at weak side linebacker. You could still use some pass rush out of your defensive ends on that defensive line. And you look on the offensive side of the football, you might have to potentially look at replacing Eric Decker with a draft choice. You have to get some help on that offensive line because you saw that offensive line was not as good as everybody built it out to be. They weren't. They need some depth and they need some talent there. So there are a lot of things to me that clearly indicate that Peyton Manning and the Denver Broncos will not make it back to Super Bowl 49, Super Bowl 50, and so on and so forth. That's what I have to say about it. I think history's on my side. What say you? It'll be fun to come back in about a year and see if I ended up being right or wrong. But I'm very confident that I'm going to be right on this one. And if you have 10 or 20 bucks floating around that you want to burn, go Go put a bet on it. The Denver Broncos will not get back to Super Bowl 49. Period.